Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for the Center for Change webinar series today. We're thrilled that you're with us. We apologize for just a speck of a late start. We have had some technical difficulties, but we think we've worked through them. You should be able to see Kristi Shohet on your screen, and she is talking to us through the phone, and it sounded good on our end, so hopefully you all will be able to hear her when we launch in, but I think we're good to go. So thank you all for your patience. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we turn things over to Kristi. A copy of the PowerPoint is in the handout section of the toolbar. You're welcome to reference that if you'd like. It's easier to see it on the screen as Kristi's presenting, so if that's easier, you're more than welcome to download that to your computer to utilize later. You also can access that PowerPoint later on the Center for Change website. So yeah, if you need to access it later, you can reference it there. A copy of the post test is in the handout section of the toolbar. This is for reference only. To obtain continuing education credit, you must take the online post test, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. You're welcome to submit questions in the questions section of the toolbar. We'll try to get to a few of those at the end of Kristi's presentation. I'll keep an eye on those throughout, and then we'll circle back and get to a few of those at the end. When the webinar ends, there will be an evaluation that will pop up automatically on your screen. If you would take 30 seconds or so to complete that evaluation, that would be really helpful for us. That's a continuing education requirement for us. It's completely anonymous, so feel free to be candid in your feedback. We then tabulate those results and send those to the CE entities. And then about an hour after the webinar ends, you will receive a separate email with the link to take the online test. You must take the test online in order to receive continuing education credit. Once you pass that test, a certificate will automatically be downloaded to your computer. So if you don't see it on your screen, take a look in your downloads file. Sometimes it hides there. So again, that will come in a separate email about an hour after we finish. There'll be a link to take the online test. Okay, before I turn it over to Kristi, I just want to say a little bit about Kristi. So I have worked at Center for Change for 14 years, and which has been just wonderful. And the first trip I took when I started at Center for Change 14 years ago was to Boise, Idaho. And Kristi was one of the first folks that I got to see while I was there. And it was so kind and wonderful. Her embracement of me and just being so warm and welcoming to me at Center for Change and my new role there. And you know, I had heard about Kristi long before I walked through her door. Dr. Barrett had spoken so highly of her, and she does phenomenal work in the eating disorder world. She's an eating disorder supervisor. She's a clinical supervisor. She's been doing this for a lot of years and so knows her stuff, and could have easily said to me, okay, you got 5 minutes of my time, I got things to do, and she didn't. She was just kind and wonderful and lovely and very welcoming, and I've been a fan ever since. So I'm so happy to have Kristi with us today, so you all can hear from her, and the wisdom that she brings to this field is really unparalleled, and I'm just thrilled to have her. So with that being said, Kristi, welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to you. So here we go. Let me change the presenter to you. It's coming your way. And you just need to show your screen.
Okay.
There it is.
On?
Yep,
right,
you're on, and I can hear you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my microphone and my camera, but I'm right here. So if you need something, holler, and I'll keep an eye on things, and then we'll see you at the end.
All right. Oh, thank you so much, Tamara. That was a wonderful introduction. That was so kind of you. Okay, so something just went wrong because I see a picture of me. I'm already having technical difficulties and not my PowerPoint. What do I do, Tamara?
Your PowerPoint is still there. I see it, Kristi. Maybe just click somewhere on the screen besides your picture.
Can I? Okay. No, it just went to the next slide. My picture's taking up the whole screen. Can I?
Yeah. I can see it, and it is on the second slide. Can you see it on your screen?
The presentation or the picture? I think
the
my
presentation.
No, I can't. It's
okay.
it's just, and my picture literally just popped up to the whole screen. I swear I didn't touch anything.
Okay, that's okay. Is there a little X on your picture somewhere? Not on
Yes.
the whole thing, but on your picture?
Let's see. It looks like there's a pause button, or at the top right corner, there's I can shut that, but I don't know if that's going to shut off the webinar.
No, I just want you to you should be able to make your picture smaller or turn it off entirely. Shelley, any suggestions? Let's see. It's okay. Hey, folks, give us just a minute. Kristi, can you shoot me a quick picture of what you're seeing?
Yes. Okay.
So a quick picture of your screen.
I don't want to lose the volume again. Okay, so that. All right, I just sent it to you, Tamara.
Okay. As soon as I get it, I'll take a look and see what I can see.
Okay.
Kristi, this is Shelley. Underneath your picture, do you see like 3 little lines that you can hover over?
No. I can, if I keep my cursor on the picture, that screen, it's the GoToWebinar viewer.
Okay. Shelley, I'm sending it to you, Shelley, so you can see.
Can I, you know what, I think, and now I can see on the top of the picture screen, I can see where I can minimize it. Can I try that?
Yeah,
or is it
try that. And then right next to that is also an X. I think you can X that entirely, but let's try the minimization first.
Okay, I think that worked. Now it just says people can see you. Let's see. Okay,
That's great.
I think we're golden.
If you can see your PowerPoint, we're good to go. You good?
Well, I'll find out in a minute as soon as I hit the move forward button. I'm so sorry, everybody. Thank you so much
for
your patience. I'm definitely not, that nice introduction. I'm definitely not a tech wizard by any stretch. Hopefully I'm better in my day job, right? So yes, the topic today is Communications 101, Essential Skills to Support Caregivers. Oh no, oh my goodness, it's not moving. The presentation isn't moving.
Just click anywhere on that screen.
There
you go. Good job.
There it is, we're moving. So the objectives today will be to discuss the role of the caregiver, to learn how eating disorder thoughts disrupt and affect our relationships, and to recognize communication barriers that impair trust, and then of course self-care. We really want to work for our not just our clients, but also our caregivers, how to have self-trust for themselves and to help support and model good self-trust for their loved ones. That's part of their role as the caregiver. So listing here, we need to support our loved one. We'll go into lots of detail, I promise, but to listen, and try to discern those subliminal messages. The eating disorder is not necessarily going to speak the same language that we speak. It's as if you're learning a completely different language. I tell my clients all the time, as if you are speaking Italian and somebody else is speaking English. That's what it's like with your eating disorder in your head. You get it, but nobody else does, unless of course they speak Italian. So for the loved ones, to try to help them discern the difference and to even pick up on eating disorder, kind of some language, some cues and whatnot, so they can be more prepared in taking care of their loved ones. And relinquishing control, that can be very, very difficult for loved ones. They are used to being in charge, especially family members or even sometimes spouses. So it's helpful for them to know there's a treatment team involved, and your treatment team are experts. At very minimum on the treatment team, you will have your medical doctor, the counselor, and a dietitian, the very minimum. And depending on their loved one's needs, there may be a cardiologist, maybe a psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse practitioner on the team. They may have be working with exercise specialist or a dentist or a yoga instructor or even another counselor. So it's important to help the loved one recognize how to just stay in their lane and turn to their team. That's what we're here for. So education, we're going to talk about, there's a slide that shows the difference between the myths and the facts of a eating disorder. There's amazing resources that we have available to ourselves now and to our caregivers. and to potentially move them into those directions, and then, of course, reconvene in your meetings with them so that they can learn the correct approach for their loved ones. Communicating effectively, well, we look at communication in a lot of different ways, but 4 types of communication are aggressive, passive, passive-aggressive, and assertive. And so we are going to do our best to teach assertive communication. That sounds easier than an actual is done at times, and yet that we're going to work on that with them in our offices and with their loved ones, and sometimes independently. The next one, to reinforce that we're not just nourishing these folks physically, but we've got to re-nourish them emotionally. Their eating disorder has really become their primary support system in their mindset, and they need to learn how to allow others in that are functional support caregivers like you and other loved ones, and how to do that so that you get to gradually remove and move out the eating disorder and then replace the eating disorder with yourself. But part of that is understanding where they're at emotionally. And in order to do that, sometimes you have to look at your own personal beliefs and behaviors and ask yourself, are some of my beliefs being modeled in an unhealthy manner to my loved ones? So you may be able to say something and believe a certain way that is certainly functional and reasonable for you, but not necessarily the person with the eating disorder. And so it's very important to understand what that looks like from your view. And then you're going to learn how to, we'll talk a little bit later about what I refer to as the eating disorder filter, and how you may say something, but it goes through this eating disorder filter and is perceived completely different from what you meant. So, and then as I said before, personal self-care. It's so important that we model this for our loved ones, and that we help them to be utilizing their own personal self-care, because this work is not easy and on anybody. It's definitely, the eating disorder in a family affects everybody. And so personal self-care is critical. So support. Just from a very basic understanding, humans need to feel loved. Now, that sounds like, okay, yes, that's obvious, but how we feel loved is different for different people. And so we want to know what their story is. We want to build the connection with our loved ones so that they will tell their story. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick, and you may get just little snippets of information. But again, as I said earlier, that's why you need to try to discern what's the subliminal message here. What is it that they're telling me, and they're just not expressing either verbally, maybe they're telling you by showing you, but they sometimes and oftentimes can't articulate what they feel, so, or what their thoughts are. And so it's important to just try to listen to the story. Again, listen as much as you possibly can. And that's going to open up the opportunity to rebuild those connections. And don't let your family or yourself be held hostage by this eating disorder. We understand the eating disorder impacts them. We do as therapists, of course, understand that, but our loved one, or excuse me, our caregivers don't always understand that. And so we want to try to help them how to keep that family running in a healthy manner without letting the eating disorder infiltrate everything, all the decisions that everybody is making and what they're doing, because it's offensive and aggressive. And then this need for respect and recognizing loved ones' accomplishments and successes is imperative. Understand that, first of all, the treatment that they're going through is in many cases one of the most difficult things that a loved one will ever have to experience. And then, of course, the family as being their support system. And so personal respect, again, for you to remodel and to model that for your loved ones. And then for you to make sure you're respecting their process and their recovery, their journey. As I said, it's certainly not easy, and it does impact everybody. So trying to just take that step back and meet them from where they're at, and then move from there. I should also say that, sorry, just flip the slide, but there will be times, especially at the beginning of care, for us, we know as counselors, that we may have to lead our clients. And then at some point we get to stand next to our clients. And then at another point we get to be behind our client, and we're just supporting them in their recovery, in their process. So that's what we want our parents to understand. So this slide, I want to talk a little bit more about the myths and facts. it's interesting. Of course, we know factually we need to have a treatment team. We know personality characteristics are going to influence communication and influence the capacity for someone to have an eating disorder. And some folks have really struggling with perfectionism, and they have to be the best at everything they do. So their eating disorder is just one more way of all the areas in their life that they have to be the best at everything. How we could use that to our benefit is that use that tenacious quality and to recover, use it in their recovery plan and so on, and helping them learn how to stay on that path, as opposed to this false belief of this eating disorder as your best friend and your confidant and whatnot. So other personality characteristics, if somebody has depression and or anxiety, that is going to impact the way that we approach them from not only our standpoint, but our how the caregivers are going to approach their loved ones and how they're going to communicate. Some people characteristics are impulsive, and maybe the caregiver isn't impulsive, and so to try to understand what that is like, what their impulsive thoughts are, and how their tendency to react impulsively comes from those personality characteristics. We don't want to try to remove those characteristics, because that's who they are. And so much of the eating disorder has taken over the individual's ability to know themselves and become that identity, takes over their identity. And so we want to embrace those characteristics, and we want to really put the spotlight on how beneficial they are to them when used functionally and appropriately. You got to resist that urge to give advice. You're the caregivers. You want to jump in. You want to fix and tell your story, perhaps, or something along these lines. And we want our caregivers to understand this isn't the best approach, and especially with this population of eating disorders, because their tendency is to pull away, move away, isolate. And so remember, they've already done that. In order to move them back in, we need to just be able to listen to what their stories are, and their concerns and their worries and whatnot. Suggest meal options kind of goes along with all foods are scary. So when the dietitian has given you a meal plan for your loved one, and or has worked with you on it, then and or a spouse, then it's important for you to understand all foods are scary. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. You should ask your loved one, well, what do you want to eat tonight? Because their answer is going to be nothing. Ed will say nothing, and they there doesn't give them any leeway to speak beyond that. Or they may say, I don't know. And there comes that heatedness that kind of lives in the house with the eating disorder. And so it's opposed to you look at the meal plan and you may say, oh, we're going to have chicken tonight. Would you prefer pasta or rice with that tonight? And so you're giving them those types of options, but there isn't an option not to eat. And all foods are scary. I've done this technique a number of times in my office with family members. Sometimes it's the whole family, but other times it maybe it's the mom or mom and dad and my client. And I will put some foods on my table and say, okay, we're going to you have a notepad, and I want you to take each one of these food items and look at them, and you can pick them up if you want, or touch and smell them, whatever. But to write down a little statement of what does that food mean to you, and then we have each person read their list. It's very interesting to the caregivers. What they put on their list is normal to them, but what they hear of their loved one is super, oh my gosh, I had no idea you felt that way. And so it helps the caregiver know how they're feeling. Certainly, again, you don't want to let that eating disorder hold you hostage, so you're not going to placate to the eating disorder, but you're going to understand a little bit more of the plight that your loved one is experiencing. And then guilt and shame, we'll skip over that, hop over to myths. These are understandably so why people think these things, but they're not going to work, and not in the home of someone with an eating disorder. He can recover on his own. There's only one way to communicate. I need or should force her to eat. I'll offer low-fat foods. She needs to understand what she is doing to us, or he is doing to us, and how this is affecting our family. Back over to the guilt and shame. They already know that, and unfortunately, they're already experiencing their own challenges. And of course, as therapists, we all know this, but their own demons, if you will, and that big fight, pull, protect the eating disorder. But no, I don't want the eating disorder, but I do want the eating disorder, and not knowing whether they're one foot in the door to therapy or one foot out or both, and trying to find how to navigate all that. And so guilt and shame, a person cannot recover when they're feeling guilt and shame. And that's what the caregivers really need to know more than anything, how they can communicate in such a way, in such an assertive way, so that they're not inviting guilt and shame into that room of conversation. Again, this is something, guilt and shame is what will keep a person to isolate and to turn back to their eating disorder, because they feel like it's too big of a mountain to climb and I can't get there, as opposed to I need to learn where my power is. I need to use my power. And the more I reconnect to myself with and redefine my identity, the more likely I am going to be able to kick this eating disorder to the curb. So we're going to start talking about some communication styles. Automatic assumptions, self-blame, blame others. When we are experiencing difficulty or challenges in our lives, we often either pull in or we explode and express outwardly. And if that's the case, so we make these assumptions, well, this is how it is for me, so this is how it is for you. And none of those communication styles are accurate or effective. And so just know, if that's where your brain as the caregiver tends to go, then it's like, I think of that old song, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places. You're going to miss what's really important, as I said before, the listening part and the learning what the story is. That's going to come from being able to get moving yourself into this place where it is calm space. And any of these options of communication it's just going to take you away from that. Dichotomous thinking is another example, because dichotomous thinking causes dichotomous talking, speaking, and those are using these words that are in extremes. And in doing so, if we think in extreme, we're going to feel that pent-up emotion, and we're going to behave in extreme, or become very elevated or agitated or angry and whatnot. I think it's very difficult, and it's easy for me to say. It wasn't easy for me to do. Years ago, 1 year New Year's resolution, I'm not a New Year's resolution person, but I said to my clients, okay, every time you catch me using one of these words, I want you to call me out on it. And it was really just kind of this game I was playing, but I really did start noticing I was using the dichotomous words to such effect that it was affecting my extreme reactions, as opposed to being able to think, bring it back into the center. So it was a game we played, and then it kind of got them to be aware of what they were doing and how they were doing this. And it actually, probably within the next 2 or 3 months, it really did bring me back down to this concise way. I mean, I don't want to blow it in front of my clients, and yet there's that chitting that always seems to go on in our sessions. So it's like, yeah, that I did it. But it was helpful, I think, to all of us to learn to be aware of that. And caregivers, same thing. It's important for them. It's important to use that soft, gentle voice, even though sometimes you feel like you don't have it. And in that case, you just give yourself your own time out. Again, that self-care may be that I just need to take a break here, and to say, look, I feel myself going someplace I'm not liking. Can we just reconvene? Give me 10, 15 minutes. I just need to recollect myself. Again, these are things that people respect. And so when the role model can model this way, then the receiver of that information can respect it. Critical statements. They're subliminal, they're intentional. Maybe it's something, as I mentioned earlier about knowing what your own personal beliefs are. Maybe it's something that you do really have to think about or recognize, but am I doing this? Am I being too critical, as opposed to the achievements that there's this population of eating disorders, these kiddos, these folks are some of the most elitist of our world. In so many ways, they're extremely talented, they're brilliant, they're just amazing on every level. And what we want to do is reconnect them to that part of them. Maybe it was even pre-eating disorder, but to help and in such a way that it helps them reconnect with their identity, because again, the eating disorder became the mask and infiltrated their own identity to such a point that they no longer have one. They just believe everything the eating disorder tells them. And of course, society is happy to reinforce that. But we need to stand for eating disorder, loving our bodies, and so on and so forth. And there's so much of that information available today that it's easier to do, but we need to recognize it and physically move ourselves into that space. So this is a slide on communication patterns. So you will notice at the top you have the family or the group couples that are high conversation orientation, and at the very bottom, low conversation orientation. So we're just going to split that in two. And now if we put the line through the center, you have on the right side low conformity orientation, and on the left side you have high conformity orientation. I'm trying to do that backwards. So what you're going to see in the middle is at the top half, the high conversation orientation, either pluralistic or consensual. So both of those are healthy conversations in a family that engender positive interaction and respect. So going to the pluralistic side, you may have lots of conversation again, but low conformity, that's that group of folks that maybe we have political conversation at the dinner table, and we have different views, but we're respectful to each other. And so that engenders the high conversation and the support. So pluralistic. On the other side is the consensual, where there's high conformity. Maybe those folks in high conversation, they do agree with each other. They're politically, they have the same views, they have the same support, they talk about some article that they read and they share with everybody. And so this is where you really want to be in a healthy family, so that when an eating disorder either is there or has been there or is now new to the family, you have the ability to communicate in a healthier manner. The lower part of this diagram, of course, protective is what we would tend to call the helicopter parent. There's high conformity more out of fear of it than anything else, and low conversation because of that fear. Or laissez-faire, there's no conformity. This is maybe the rebel with what seems to be the eating disorder, low conversation orientation. There's very little interaction. And this is the family that is being held hostage by the eating disorder, and they are afraid. So eating disorder filter it's what I referred to this earlier, the conversation, real or perceived. Now, I put this slide together from information from dialogue and conversations that I've had with all my clients. And when I have talked to them at a time saying, okay, I'm going to do this presentation, it's going to be for the caregivers, because I've done a few of them, this is what they've always said: make sure you tell them this. So hopefully this will be something that will be helpful for your clients as well. So again, on the I guess that's the right side of the screen, the conversation starts out by this person who believes they're supporting their loved one. Oh, you look really nice, but the eating disorder says she thinks I'm fat. Or, what would you like for dinner? And what she hears is, you can't eat today, you already ate too much. Do you think you should eat another cookie? And she hears, you don't deserve to eat desserts. The question, would you like to go for a walk? And the response or the thought is, she thinks I should exercise more. Or, you need to eat breakfast before school. And she hears, she doesn't trust me. Or, you're doing great, keep up the good work. And he hears, you're eating too much, you must have gained some weight. So it's helpful, hopefully, for our caregivers to realize this. You say things that go to the filter. I think the other example that I mentioned earlier is when I put the food out on the table and have the different family members describe what they see and how they view this so completely different. So this is an exercise I also like to do in my sessions, where I give the family a sheet of paper and I write it kind of like a little squiggly line, or you could do an arrows as well. And on the left side is the thought or comment they have, and then on the left side and on the right side would be your response of what is a parent believe they hear, what are they thinking they hear, or what do they mean by it, and then vice versa. And that is helpful also as an exercise just for clients to work on. I may say, okay, in this week, I want you to write down every, on that, margin, on the left side of the margin, I want you to write down all the thoughts that you have that are eating disorder, and then how that's impacting you, or what you think you should do, and again, how that's impacting you, what the eating disorder is going to tell you. So just getting them aware. It also helps to separate when folks are unable to know the difference between their voice and their eating disorder voice. Just helps them to separate that. And again, it helps parents to understand that this isn't a coup. This isn't their excuse of saying, I didn't do it, it was my eating disorder. They truly believe that. And so it's helpful for parents to understand that. So barriers, what are the barriers to building these connections? I mentioned earlier that in order to have that healthy family dynamic and communication, we need to know what those barriers are. And so, for instance, power struggling, it's very difficult to avoid at many times, but it's also important to know the power struggle. It'll end nowhere. I think the picture is a prime example of how that's going to go. And that might be that time where you just say, I'm not feeling comfortable right now with where my head is. And again, you're taking this as assertive. You're taking responsibility of, I feel like I could use a few minutes. So, let's reconvene. If there's a power struggle, your loved one is not going to feel safe. We talked about identity. There's a huge loss of identity, and that's the barrier to the person with the eating disorder to connect to the loved ones and the functional folks in their life, which creates this false sense of dysfunctional independence. Oversimplifying, it's easy to do. You want to give that advice, but oversimplifying with like these simple solutions is extremely frustrating to the loved one. And so we want to help our caregivers understand what oversimplifying is. Personalizing, I think that's probably one of the biggest topics that I talk about, one of the biggest, in that when you're the caregiver in anything in your life, you really need to know how to depersonalize situations that you are in. And when you know this is the eating disorder, again, why it's very helpful for you to know the difference between your daughter and Ed talking. But when you personalize, it impairs you from being able to be that assertive person that you want to be, or to be that supportive person that you want to be, and to hear their story and to engender the story and so on. So you got to really, really learn how to put up that wall to depersonalize. I call that become a good dodger or deflector of some aggressive statement that's coming your way. Alternatively, if you did do the thing, then that's a good place to accept responsibility and to say, I guess the example I gave earlier was when I was trying to learn not to have such strong dichotomous language, and I asked my clients, go ahead and throw that out, tell me when I do it. And so I would personalize it and be able to say, oh man, you got me, I did that, sheesh, there goes, I want to work on that, and so on, so that it's important to acknowledge when I did. I could see why that made you uncomfortable, and just to own it, being authentic. And breaking confidentiality. Oh my goodness, some of the biggest problems I've seen have been in situations where someone has broken confidentiality. And I just try to encourage you to be very, very mindful and respectful in this way, to not go through their things. Unless, of course, it's a dangerous situation, then that's a different story. Unhealthy boundaries, those are the you statements, because they're judgmental. You did this, you did that, I can't handle this anymore, and so on. When your loved one says, I'm eating in my room, that is you being held hostage by the eating disorder, because you need that. You need your loved one to be with you. You want to have those times together. You can eat this, it's low fat or it's low calories. We talked about that earlier. Again, that's a simple suggestion. It's a simple solution, and not suggestion, but solution, and it's not helpful. You want to really stay aligned with the dietitian and the advice the dietitian is giving you, and how he or she is helping you work through the food aspect of your loved one and how you're going to nourish them physically. Diet talks during meals, no diet talks. This is a time to really embrace this family time together. And there's so much else you get to talk about. Maybe you talk about what you guys just did last weekend, or what's happening in the next couple of days, or that weekend, some plans that you have, or some upcoming holidays, or some vacation, and so on. You want to keep that a very healthy, that environment very healthy across the board. And so again, this is where you're building those connections, and you're also getting to nourish your loved one. So no diet talk, no food talk. food group restrictions such as desserts. Now and again, I'll have somebody who will say, oh yeah, we don't eat desserts in my house. I'll of course confirm that with the loved one, but then have to try to really work with their caregiver on why desserts are, and all foods are good foods, and desserts are an important aspect of somebody's, of our normal eating regimen, and or just our normal meal diets. Yes. So no food group restrictions. That comes up also now more so with people who are doing certain diets like keto and numerous other ones. So you got to be very, very careful with that and help the loved ones understand. And then bargaining. This is one of my favorites. I'll buy you a new dress if you just eat. I had a client who came in once very, very upset from weekend, spending time with their cabin with their dad, mom and dad, and dad. She says at one point just looked at her and said, do you love me? And she said, well, yes, Dad, of course I love you. And he said, then can you just eat for me? Will you just eat for me? And she was devastated because she didn't want her father to feel that she didn't love him. And she was so upset with him for thinking that this was something so simplistic. And then just felt somewhat betrayed that he would put that together. And what is she supposed to do now? So she felt very, very trapped. So bargaining is a slippery slope. Ask you not to go there. You'll have to really help your parents on what is bargaining, what isn't, and help them understand maybe a more healthy direction and approach. So some healthy boundaries. We don't negotiate with terrorists, that being the eating disorder. I statements. I have so much respect for what you're going through. Oh, I so appreciate you doing this with us. And I know this can be very difficult for you, and I understand that you have a lot of challenges, but I am just really appreciate you. And so those I statements, or if it's a statement that you have to make about something that you're uncomfortable with, I feel uncomfortable. I don't like where we're at, and I want things to be different, and I want to learn how to be part of your difference, and so on and so forth. You being able to think differently and so on, so that it's, whatnot, so that you're not so challenged by this eating disorder, and or challenged by the beliefs that the eating disorder has given you, has left you with. And then make sure you have some time set aside to talk about these statements, these conditions, or something that has come up. Say your daughter, and it's not uncommon, flips a cog 5 minutes before dinner, and you're putting everything together. Maybe the natural response is, I can't do this right now. I'm making dinner. This is not necessary, or something that's going to be aggressive. Why do you always do this right now? This isn't helpful. As opposed to, I hear what you're saying. I know you're uncomfortable. I promise we're going to pick this up after dinner. So, and then active listening, teaching your clients how to do active listening, your caregivers, how to active listening by listen to what their loved ones are saying, repeating back what they're saying, asking, am I understanding this right? And so on. And then they can add to what they want to say into addition to that. And that's how you're going to encourage a safe experience. But we've talked about asking the loved ones to share their story, and keep the conversation at what's been brought up. So the example I gave earlier, the kiddo comes up 5 minutes before dinner and starts complaining about what mom's making, and that she doesn't want to eat, and that the conversation the turnaround was, why are you always doing this? Why? It's shifting the conversation. It's shifting it potentially to something else, as opposed to, we're going to talk about this after dinner. Thank you for letting me know. I'm right here for you. So emotional and instrumental support, that's exactly what that's going to entail. So functional communication that invokes trusting relationships. I mentioned earlier on in the objective, we need this trust, to go back to trust, because the eating disorder, of course, has moved the trust in the healthy relationship, in the family relationship, or in the spousal relationship, has moved it out, and now the focus has come on this eating disorder, and so the trust has come on the eating disorder. So we need to be able to move that out. Healthy communication, again, being aware of if we're blaming, if we're trying to do those quick fixes, or if anything that we're saying is increasing that guilt and that shame. cultivate respect. We've talked a little bit about this. Again, what are their past accomplishments? What are their present accomplishments? And maybe even moving forward, but really recognizing the courage that it takes to get through their eating disorder and all their challenges. I had a father who once I was actually going to back up. I had a client who had bipolar and bulimia, and he at some point got himself in enough trouble that police came to his house, handcuffed him, took him in the back of their car to a treatment center. And when he came in, I was with the father and the son at the treatment center, and they asked the father, what he was experiencing, what he was feeling, and he broke down, just weeping and telling his son, I am so sad. I have so much respect for everything that you're going through. I've been reading some books on bipolar. I'm beginning to understand this, and the courage that it has taken you to get this far. I'm embarrassed that I have not been here for you. And it was so kind and generous and authentic. It's just exactly what this young man needed to hear. I saw the light just go on, and he just opened up to Dad. And this is what we need to remember when we are interacting with our loved ones, just that authentic self, that unconditional, authentic understanding. And the C words for support, kind of to easier way to remember: calmness, communication, compassion, cooperation, consistency, and coaching. I think compassion is also at the very base of being able to have that understanding for yourself, your loved one, as I just mentioned, this father, having that compassion. And I think there's to be able to see the world through their eyes and understand that story. So, but there's some wonderful compassion books out there. One of my favorites is the workbooks. I just personally love workbooks. So Kristen Neff has one on mindfulness, compassion, and again, I think that it's really helpful for, in order to ever get to forgiveness, you have to have compassion. And so there's going to be a lot of work done in the household or in the home for this. And then the non-judgmental questions and statements, I've given some examples here. The agreeing to disagree respectfully, I talked about that before, in the healthy communication in the family. Mealtime distractions. One of the things that I used to like to do, or we used to do at the treatment center, was have a basket of different things to look at, kind of distractions to look at, that you can also use as talking points when you're in your mealtime, because it is really important to have something fun that you're talking about, and maybe a little book on some meditation cards, or a poetry book, and somebody flips through and they pick one and they read it and you talk about it, or things like that. So having some good healthy distractions is helpful. And now into our self-care section. It's important to take that step back. I think we've talked about all these things. Ask for help. Spend some time alone, putting yourself first, asking what you need, setting those very, very healthy boundaries, staying at home sometimes, and or going out and saying no. So forgiving yourself is critical, as I said earlier. In order to ever be able to have that compassion that for self and others, you're going to need to work on this forgiveness. And this is just another slide, one of the Maslow's hierarchy slides. And the reason I use this is I wanted to show, we all know what this is. At the very, very base, at the base of this pyramid, second from the bottom, is self-care. That's where self-care fits in under safety needs. And so it's super important for our caregivers to understand, again, self-care for you. You need to be able to work through this process so you can help others. I use the example sometimes with my folks, as if we're going to fly somewhere, that flight attendant will give us those instructions every time. If the event of an emergency, your oxygen mask will automatically deploy from the ceiling. Safely secure your mask before you're helping the people around you. That's what self-care is. So, and again, this is another just little quick self-care reminders. Make a cup of coffee or tea, light your favorite candle, enjoy your favorite playlist, go for a walk. It's just you really just sensory, using the sensory system to bring yourself down to a more comfortable, happy place. Personal examination exercises, I'm listing, this is a book by Dana Herron. It's a fairly new book, Loving Someone with an Eating Disorder, and it's fantastic. If you haven't read this, I think it's great for, obviously for therapists and for caregivers, because she just goes into a lot more detail and more examples to use from an extension of what I've done today. But one of the things I particularly liked about this was the self-care assessment. She's got some assessments in her book, and so it helps people again to kind of reiterate what they need in order to give back. Seeds of Empathy, I think, is imperative also, and consequently, it's if we can offer somebody else empathy, it helps them to change their negative thoughts. Excuse me. Okay. Sorry about that. Resources. There's so many awesome resources out today, and Nita has some wonderful ones. Parent toolboxes. The caregiver blog is wonderful because it helps parents. Obviously, it connects them with other folks who are in their situation or similar situation, and what they can do, and kind of having conversation back and forth to other folks. And obviously, if you've got a family group in your area, that's certainly wonderful and ideal. And then all the many handouts and books available today that you want to obviously invest in for your own library. I often have a number of books, and so I'll pass them out to my parents too and give them the opportunity to go through them. Something I also do in family sessions, I ask I'll take the parent in first to a session in the individual sessions. I'll take them in first, spend about 10 minutes with them, kick them out and go grab my client, and then finish the session with them. If what the family can tell us is so imperative to the work that we're doing, then consequently, if they give me a little information, chances are my client's going to come in and tell me anyway. But in case they didn't, it gives me an opportunity. What I refer to as I can backdoor it. And I always get permission first from the parent or the caregiver. Can I express this to your client, your loved one today, my client? And to make sure in case I need to bring it up that way, and then I'll help them to understand why that was important for the caregiver to tell me. But I also always go that direction first, so that the client doesn't feel like, if I did that backwards, the client might feel like, oh, I'm just telling their parent everything or their spouse everything they just told me. I also invite spouses to come in anytime to sessions, and I always tell my client, if you want to bring a family member, a loved one, a spouse, whatever, then you don't have to tell me ahead of time. Obviously, I have to have an authorization signed before I can meet with them, but we'll just go with whatever you want to talk about when they come in. And a final word, too often we underestimate the power of a touch, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear, an honest compliment, or the smallest act of caring, all of which have the potential to turn a life around. I want to thank you today for participating. I'm so sorry about the technical issues that we had. Totally my bad. And just to kind of recap quickly, we need to have connections. In order to have connections, we need to develop a sense of understanding and listen and hear our loved one's story. We need to understand that they have this eating disorder. It's become what they now are connected to. And so we need to gradually help them turn away from that by being available to them. And understanding them and giving them that unconditional love and support, and that's what's going to help the loved ones be able to ultimately move their feel the loved ones feel loved, and help the caregivers be able to move their loved ones back into their circle of trust. Okay, I think that's all I have. Tamara?
Yep, I'm coming back, Kristi.
Okay, are there any questions?
Great, yes, we have a couple of questions, so thank you so much. It was a great presentation full of fabulous information. We have a couple of questions. One is from one of your early slides. This is from Billy, and Billy says it's one of your first several slides. It's the role of the caregiver. And near the bottom, there's a bullet point that says examine personal BI beliefs and behaviors. And Billy's wondering what BI stands for.
Oh, body image. Thank you. I missed that, obviously, when I was going through this slide. Yes, your personal body image, your own personal body image thoughts and beliefs. And so thank you so much, Billy, a wonderful question. Body image, we know, is not the be-all, end-all to the eating disorder, but it so often plays a role. And we know that it comes at the beginning of an eating disorder, it stays throughout, and it can be, unless it's an atypical eating disorder, it can be one of the most difficult pieces that you're constantly pulling back away from, because that belief somewhere along the line was that was their identity. So yes, thank you. Hopefully I answered that appropriately.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Tiffany. What can help clients with identity when the ED has become their identity?
Okay, can you start? I missed the very beginning of that, Tamara.
Yeah, sure. It's a question from Tiffany, and the question is, what can help clients with identity when the eating disorder has become their identity?
Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Thank you, Tiffany. A wonderful question. I use I make up this little technique I call the power diagram. And ultimately what we need to do is we need the client to understand that body image never was and never will give them any sense of power, give them a sense of safety, give them a sense of feeling good about themselves. It's not their identity, and it never will be, because if it were, they wouldn't have to keep working at it. It would already be their identity once, I achieved this body image goal, but the eating disorder continues to raise the bar. And so I use this this technique, like I said, I call it the power diagram. And at the top, I kind of make it into kind of 3 columns, but at the very middle, I write you. On the one side, I'm going to write the eating disorder, whatever that looks like, behaviors, and the other side, I'm going to put experiences. So I'm going to ask them to write the experience, like I felt I didn't like the reflection in the mirror today of my body. And so I call that kind of like the line of like a pendulum swings over to the other side. So I leaned on my eating disorder behavior. Maybe I binged, maybe I purged, maybe I, restricted or something along those lines. And so again, the column down the center is you. So I ask them, if you think about this as a pendulum to swing, if you bring yourself into the middle, you're going to stop that. You're going to stop the pendulum from swinging over to the eating disorder. And in the center, one of the very first words I always start with is support. Who are you? You are support. What is important to you? My support system. And they'll agree support is the quintessential, the most important thing for them in their lives. Again, these connections. So they'll kind of write, what is support? My mom, my best friend, my boyfriend, or my career, my education, and so on and so forth. They'll write all these things that they think of grandma that are support to them. And then underneath it, they may write, well, so to start defining you and who you are, your identity. They may say, I enjoy, I don't know, I'm a mother, or I'm a daughter. I enjoy school, education. I like music. I'm like to go for walks. I love nature, and so on and so forth. So they're writing all these things in the center. And again, you're asking them to look at this diagram. And when they have this thought, this eating disorder thought, and the pendulum wants to swing over to the eating disorder, they are going to stop it in the middle. So that's how I help them redefine, start building up, who are you? And they can kind of a little bit usually touch on that question at the beginning of therapy, but that's something that we're working on throughout therapy. So I tell them, go ahead and put the diagram aside, but you're going to keep adding to it as you do start rebuilding who you are, and remembering who your identity is, or maybe you never did have an identity. In that case, that's what you're going to work towards, so that, again, you in the center is your power.
Got it. Thank you. We have a question from Jill. Jill says, what do you mean by their story? Do you mean the story of their eating disorder, or just to listen deeply to them and what they are saying?
Perfect. Thanks, Jill. That's a great question. Yes, it's kind of both, because it started out as listening deeply to what is your story? What are you thinking about you, and what do you how do you feel about yourself, and so on and so forth. Again, it kind of work on a little bit on that identity. But as time, something happened along the way that they developed an eating disorder, and so that's how their story then morphed into, I'm not attractive enough, or I'm not thin enough, or I need to be more special. One of my clients told me the other day that in school, on one of those predictions that people make, it's like when you're getting ready to graduate and the other students write these predictions in, you're most likely to be a counselor, most likely to this or that. Hers was that she was most likely to be a model. And so that idea morphed to her that I need to be a model, and that's people will only like me if I look like a model, if it stays that way. So all these years later, but she has to still be the size of this, young girl, and so on. So that's her story of where the eating disorder came into her story. But then a number of other things kind of obviously continue to build off that. So that's what you want to hear, is their story.
Great, thank you. Holly is asking, since COVID has changed the way treatment is done recently in terms of, those folks who have a loved one in residential treatment, do you have suggestions to offer about how parents or caregivers can stay involved when there's, they're not able to visit in person, et cetera?
I think that's a great question. And because I don't work in residential, that might be something more to redirect to a residential facility. But I can tell you with my clients, I've taken, when I have a client that has gone into residential during COVID, I take the parent during that usually at least once a week, sometimes maybe it's every other week, but I take them into that same spot, and I'm working with the parent while their child is in residential. And then of course since I kind of know what they're working on, without divulging any of the confidentiality, of course, because I've got to be very careful with that to support my client who's going to come back to me. So I just keep working with the parent during that period of time. And again, that would be a question probably for you guys, Tamara, how you guys are handling that.
Yeah, I think we would certainly support what you said. It's a really challenging time for everybody.
Yeah.
So just doing our very best, to have, we do FaceTime, we do family therapy via Zoom.
Yeah.
We do as much as we can to try and keep them connected, and
Right.
and recognizing, and we would completely agree with your assessment that it's great for the family to have some therapeutic support on their end as they're dealing with difficulties. And quite honestly, that kind of leads into the next question. We have a question from Jackie that says, how can caregivers cope with their own guilt about their loved one's eating disorder? And I think, I'll let you comment on that, but that's one of the reasons why we would say support for the family or the caregiver while their loved one is away is vital to be able to address those sorts of feelings.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And it's always vital, because it's like the remark I made earlier. You're going to miss the important stuff if you turn this back inward. Nobody is responsible. This isn't a guilt. Guilt is not going to serve a purpose. You can never find or get to your power if you feel guilty. Excuse me. Guilt will get in the way of that. So the same thing I would ask this parent, write out this diagram. Excuse me. Excuse me. But to write out the diagram so that they can put in the center of themselves and their power, and they can. There's so many great things about them. They're missing it because they're focusing on the wrong thing.
Right. Well, the timing is good. Bless your heart, we've made you talk for an hour, and you've run out of voice. So.
Oh no, I just need to do a drink. I'm so sorry.
All right. No worries. That's all right. We recognize that lots of our folks who are on the webinar have clients that they need to see at the top of the hour. So we'll end at this point. We do have a few other questions. So if you would like to reach out to Kristi, sorry, Kristi, I can't see your slides because I swapped it already. Do you have contact information where they could reach out to you, send you an email if they had a question?
Yes, I think I can't see the slide right now either, but I'm pretty sure I did put my email address on there, I think, on the very first slide. I'm so sorry, I can't remember.
But I can't see it either. So we're a mess at the moment. But if you can't track down Kristi, you can
Yes.
track down me. So you can send an email to cfcwebinar@gmail.com and I'll connect you with Kristi. If there's a question
Perfect.
you wasn't able
Right,
to get to,
perfect.
feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to do that. Before we end,
Perfect.
just 2 quick reminders. The first one is that when I stop the webinar here shortly, an evaluation will pop up. If you would take 30 seconds or so to complete that evaluation, that would be really helpful for us. That's a continuing education requirement for Center for Change. It's completely anonymous, so feel free to give the feedback that you'd like to. We tabulate those results and send those to the CE entities after the webinar is over. And then about an hour from now, you will get a separate email from GoToWebinar. It will look really similar to the confirmation email that you got from GoToWebinar when you registered. So about an hour from now, a separate email from GoToWebinar with a link to take the online test. You must take the test online in order to receive continuing education credit. Once you pass the test online, your CE certificate will automatically be downloaded to your computer. So if you don't see it on your screen, check your downloads file because it could be hiding in there. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. My thanks again to Kristi and thanks to everybody for putting up with a little bit of technical difficulty at the beginning, but we figured it out. So thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Tamara.
Stay well, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.